How about JP from the car?
Yes, apologies for my little office today, but I have to rush to another class after this talk. I also just to pause a comment. I love Tammy's last comment about the success rate in terms of waking up peaceful. It's literally something which I think I would look up to every single day. Um, in terms of sustainability, I mean, I can take it more from maybe a retailer's point of view. Obviously, seeing my point of view is coming from retail, coming from maybe on the ground, kind of us trying to actually push the accessibility of more, let's say, products which are, let's say, so-called being sustainable, right? Meaning what we tend to end up by looking forward to is we have a certain kind of metric system in terms of how we identify specific products, right? Meaning we're not like your everyday kind of green supermarket or Wellbees where we're just basically sourcing products on a regular basis, as much as consumerism or capitalism can basically let people obviously consume as much as they possibly can consume. What we're trying to obviously do over here at Reroute is really looking into one alternatives which are able to end up by being on the lowest impact possible when it comes to from an environmental aspect, and two, on the lowest impact that they can basically end up by affecting you as from a carbon footprint point of view. This is basically what we always try to end up by finding or sourcing or procuring our products when it comes to sustainability. We always measure according to our own internal metrics and a kind of like a metric system that we basically developed ourselves to identify how this is a close enough product to try and push onto the market, which can be as close as much as an alternative that people are not going to be affected from their own, let's say, sustainable lifestyle, what they consider to be sustainable. And at the same time, it can also help them to move to a more environmental, eco-friendly approach, right? Meaning, unfortunately, and I think both Gail and Tammy really touched up on this, right? The idea of sustainability is a very big much of a buzzword that we tend to end up by using and overusing on a very, very much regular basis. Because I feel that what we're trying to end up by doing at Reroute is not only just spread awareness, right? Meaning at the end of the day, we are a business built on KPIs, trying to end up by earning a certain kind of, let's say, not only just a salary, but also being productive and being having a relatively good performance at the end of the day, that every stakeholder which is linked to Reroute is happy to see that we're making sales, and we're a productive and high performing business. So for us, what obviously is very, very important is that when it comes to market the product, we know that we're marketing to people, both from a cultural and traditional perspective in terms of the Maltese Islands, where we're starting from a very, very low understanding, right, in terms of what sustainability is and how it's going to end up by impacting them. If I was to speak from a very general kind of consensus perspective, we have people obviously who come in to the store who are, highly educated around the idea, of sustainability and climate change and how their impact through certain kind of purchases can have an effect on everyday life and as well on a larger picture. But the general consensus and the general kind of picture from people that we tend to end up by targeting is, let's say, their knowledge is a little bit limited. So we try as much as possible to spread that kind of awareness on sustainability through this idea that what we're going to end up by approaching and what we're going to end up by presenting them is the least alternative or the least different to what they're already used to in the first place, but at a much, much lower impact. That's what our definition, I think, is internally from a sustainability perspective. From a success, it's difficult. I mean, I can give you all our KPIs and tell you where we are at from a Q1, Q2, Q3 perspective, but I won't bore you over there. It's ever changing for sure. I think exactly like what Tammy said. But I think for me, the most important thing, what my success would be, is that I would get a customer coming in maybe in the future, which doesn't have to stay thinking about the possibility of what it means to do a refill, or why it's important to get their own packages, or why it's important to get their own, let's say, Tupperware, for example, in when we're doing refills and things like this, where I don't get a question of like, why does this contain shea butter and why is it more expensive? You know what I mean? Why is this particular deodorant more expensive than the everyday type of deodorant? That for me, once people have begun coming in there without me having to give an explanation every single time, and it is the typical person, a layman, coming into my store and just asking, can I have a normal natural deodorant, which I know is good for me and also good for the environment? That for me, I think would be a point where we've reached a success rate, not just as Riru, but as a society in general for Malta. So yeah.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing is that sustainability can be overwhelming when we look at the bigger picture, right? And what we're all trying to do is make it accessible to everyone. So how do we make it accessible? How do we allow people to self-reflect, to make better choices? And how do we empower behavioral change? Perhaps, Gail, you can speak a bit about how you empower people to take action at a behavioral level.
Sure. So one thing that I speak about a lot in the trainings and workshops that I run is about the why. So generally speaking, everybody has a why to do with sustainability. And a bit like Tammy was saying, right, everyone has their particular thing. So some organizations or individuals will care more about societal issues, human rights, for example, labor rights, equality, diversity, and inclusion. Some people are more into the environmental sector, so pollution or reducing climate impacts or increasing biodiversity. And other people will be more focused around the economic structure. So how things are being structured in terms of the economics, how direct or indirect economic impacts are being created by whatever it is that they care about. So one thing that I speak about a lot is, what is your why? What is it within you that makes you passionate about sustainability? And what is that? And to really have that as the core driver between yourself and what you're putting out into the world. So in terms of kind of motivation, engagement, behavior change, when you speak from a passionate place, this is what I love about sustainability, right? So in terms of, this is about entrepreneurship. So in terms of business, when you speak really from the heart, with your values, with your passion, with enthusiasm about whatever it is that you're like is your jam, when you speak about that, people get like magnetized to it. So for me, it's really about understanding yourself primarily. What is it that you're really super passionate about and that you want to put your voice to, you want to put your energy into? What do you want to create in the world? And that automatically creates this engagement from the outside. And then in terms of kind of behavioral change and how we instigate that, it's about creating places for ownership of that. So if you're running a team or you're running an organization or you want to instigate something and you're speaking about it and then someone else comes along and they're like, wow, I'm really passionate about that. It's like, how do you engage that person into what you're doing and give them some ownership? So one thing that we struggle a lot with in society is this feeling that we're disempowered, so that we can't affect change at a big enough level, or, it's all so vast, sustainability, that we don't know where to start. So it's really, for me, about instigating that action point, that place of change within each person, and giving them a space to be involved in whatever it is that you're doing, or to give them a soapbox, in which case they can speak about it and share their voice. And then when we have 10, or you see this beautiful panel here, right? There's 5 of us here on the panel, all speaking about different things, all with multiple excitement. So everything that we share is going to be affecting different people in the audience that are watching tonight. So people may, resonate more with Tammy or resonate more with me, for example. So yeah, for me, it's about what's the why, and creating ownership and action points for that, and frameworks that are easy for people to be able to implement that into some sort of action plan or simple things.
We also, earlier today, we also spoke about community and about how important and what a driver it is to affect change as well. Perhaps, JP, you can speak about how community plays a big role in your work, and also how you create, creative partnerships with local businesses and foster collaboration around sustainability.
Sure, as in, meaning when, so I can go back a little bit in time in terms of what the initial idea, right, was for Reroute when in the get-go. So we set up in 2019, and we had very big dreams, and I think that was really much reflected in how big the space was that we began renting out in the first place, which was always a bit of like an unspoken issue that we don't really talk about nowadays internally. It's never a great idea. But it was obviously around the same time that COVID unfortunately hit, because it was 2019 December we opened, and February obviously was the first couple of cases. But the initial business plan was, and this was always the initial dream, right? We wanted a space that besides pushing for the idea of, zero waste, reducing your single-use plastic footprint, trying to reduce your overall packaging footprint, things like this, because we had refills, etc., we wanted to try and also create a space where you could rent out, where you could end up by doing workshops, where there was a whole functionality in terms of moving tables, stuff like this. And we did that initially. Like for the first couple of weeks in January and in February, we had really cute meals where we had a candlelight dinner, where we got to like 3 or 4 different businesses together, someone who made olive oil, someone who made sourdough bread. At that point in time, sourdough bread was something really, it was 2019. Nobody was really baking just yet, because COVID hadn't yet just hit. So it wasn't the most famous thing ever just yet. So there was one person on the island who was making sourdough bread. And it was just such an amazing scene to see. As like, I mean, I was coming back from living abroad for over 8 years, but I had never seen that in Malta done in such a way where we had brought people together in one single sitting. There are over 30 people in the room, all candlelight dinner, eating sourdough bread, eating traditionally locally made organic food, and drinking organic wine. And we were all talking about the same subject around sustainability, around natural produce, about biodynamic wines, things like this. Unfortunately, obviously, COVID happened, and we obviously changed the whole business plan, obviously, of Reroute. But we then still moved. We still decided to have a small retail space in Balzan, which was meant to be a kind of like an office and distribution hub, basically, for the brand. And still to this day, we still believe that the core center of what Reroute really is and what really makes us different from everyone else is that we really rely on the idea of building a community, right? Because meaning we're selling something which is unfortunately still not yet 100% the norm in Malta, right? Meaning in some countries it is, in some countries it isn't. But in Malta, it definitely is not yet, right? It's still something niche. And because of that, we really found that we need to not only just build a community around people where they feel comfortable to end up by coming to one single space, where it's a one-stop shop where you can find everything which is lifestyle, kitchen, cleaning, makeup, skincare related, which is sustainable, low impact, and low carbon footprint. But it's also a place where you can feel comfortable to ask questions, or where you want to end up by finding or discovering something new for yourself, or maybe you have a curiosity that you want to try and itch with regards to you becoming a bit more low impact. And that's something that we always really appreciate around building the sense of the community. And then on top of that, like you mentioned, we still, even though it's a very small space, and I don't know if anyone's been on the forum, has been to the space, it is a small space, we really still try to end up by leveraging that off and inviting local producers, local artisanal communities or organizations or freelancers to set up shop, let's say, one evening and talk about basically what they're doing, right? Meaning we had a coffee tasting in January, we had a wine tasting, which was biodynamic and organic in March. We had someone come in, where we had Pop come in there to talk about, and that was something new for the guys at Pop, for Miguel, to come in there and to really try and find sustainable beers that he was actually serving, and he was able to really find sustainably produced and brewed beers, and he was also very surprised by doing that. So we're really trying to kind of, and by doing that, it just basically further not only instills that sense of community that you're not the only one out there looking for these kind of products, but it further kind of like, I would say, anchors the idea that this is really the way forward. And this is, I think, the future for how we're going to end up by shopping and how we're going to end up by seeking our products itself. And it just gives us a certain platform and more visibility to local artisan people, and gives a bit more inspiration to others to try and maybe reach out there and actually do something themselves. So yeah, that's a little bit what we try to do in terms of community.
I think so.
I love that. And in a similar way, I was coming to you, Tammy. Perhaps you can speak about Kurzita.
I think if I can chime in as well about, to just jump on what JP said, as we said in the beginning, sustainability is huge. So whether you're a business owner, whether you're a consumer, whether whoever wherever you are in the world, and you would like to kind of, you're interested in sustainability and you'd like to implement it in some way and somehow in your life, the minute you get onto that kind of journey, it can be extremely overwhelming, as we've been mentioning. So by creating community or finding community, if you're not the one creating it, it makes you feel less alone. And so suddenly this massive thing becomes more real. And as sustainability champions, and it's not just us who are champions, it's anyone who goes onto that journey. So even anyone in this room today are now sustainability champions after you leave today. We have a kind of responsibility. We have a responsibility to kind of be part of the community in whatever shape or form that is. And by being part of community, there's education that comes into play naturally. Like JP said, even just by sitting around the table, you're learning something or you're teaching something, and it's a two-way stream. So I think that concept of community, when it comes to sustainability, needs to go hand in hand. So that overwhelming feeling that most times you are going to feel helpless, and the further you go into the journey, unfortunately, there's going to be even more helplessness in it. But it also, that also subsides throughout your journey. And the community changes everything. So it's an asset for you to find the community to be a part of, if you're willing to go on to that sustainability journey. To feed into Kurzita, for anyone who doesn't know, co-founded it with 3 of my closest friends, lifelong friends, where our aim is to, activate collective agency in Malta. Now, what does this mean? We, as friends, showed up for each other, who all work in sustainability. And when you're working in sustainability, sometimes, especially on an island like ours, you feel like you're climbing an uphill battle, right? And so we just showed up for each other. And by showing up for each other, it really propelled us. It feeds back into, we made our own little microcosm of a community, and it propelled us to really keep on going forward. And then we were like, wait, we need to share this space with others. And for Kurzita, we focus more on political stance, but obviously sustainability always feeds into that. And our big question mark was like, why do people in Malta, we're focusing in Malta, it's not because I'm judging Malta, but we need to start somewhere, right? And our place, our home is Malta. Why do we feel this feeling of helplessness so much? Where is this coming from? And we can do so many big things to try and change that, but unless we kind of create that community to get individuals to self-reflect before moving on to those big impact things, because as well, usually what comes with the presumption of sustainability activism and all of these things is that we have to do things big. We don't need to do things big. Even just the smallest change can create impact, and that impact then creates a ripple effect, and before you know it, that small impact becomes a big impact. And what we're trying to do is kind of to disseminate and to debunk this idea that impact means big, and impact means I need to be a sustainability warrior, or I need to be no. You know, it literally just means something even small within your own household. You know, my cousin and his girlfriend, they're very, you know, they're not these outspoken people, perhaps like I am, but they're on a mission to remove their waste, their food waste in their own house. So they literally never have food waste in their own house. That is massive in my eyes. That's so cool and that's so good. And that's just literally something they're doing within their own home. So this is what we're trying to kind of like activate. That's what we mean by like activating agency within individuals, of this idea that anyone can create change, and that change doesn't need to be big. It can be really small, but at least it's something.
Can you give us some more examples? You mentioned another one this morning.
Yeah, so actually there's Isabel Warrington, who is this larger than life woman who I absolutely adore. And she lives in Senglia. And every morning when she was leaving her house, all the planters, like she lives in like an alleyway, and all the planters were always filled with rubbish. And this was just eating her alive every time she'd leave the houses. Now she has a lot of she has a green fingers anyway, so she's really into planting and all of this. So one day she literally decided to just clean up these planters, buy soil, buy plants with her own money, and just start planting, you know, new plants into these beautiful planters that were already in Senglia. Before she knew it, this became this neighborhood community activity where people from all ages, people from all kind of backgrounds got together to clean up the areas and the alleyways of Senglia. Long story short, this ended up leading to a community garden. The NGO Dharma Dwarna, if nobody has heard of them, definitely look them up. They are working on placemaking in Malta, Dharma Dwarna. They teamed up with Isabel and they created a community garden in Senglia. So Isabel's personal actions turned into a whole neighborhood community action, basically, which for us was, you know, that was one of the first stories that we shared, because we have our events and this is what we kind of do. We share other people's stories so that people in the audience realize that if that person can do it, then I can too. And the ripple effect that this has had has been amazing. You know, like we've had people reaching out who live in other villages where they've been like, oh my God, I really was inspired by Isabel's story and I got in touch with my mayor and now we're doing this, this and this. And it's just great, you know, because it's this idea of we all have the possibility to create change. It's not just the people in power. Actually, we have more ability to create change than they do.
I love that. That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing. How about Gail, at a business level? You spoke about circular thinking this morning, you know, shifting towards collective ownership and collaboration. Perhaps you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so circular thinking, I don't know how normal this language is and this audience that I'm with at the moment. So circularity is really about creating from a place of closing loops. So anything that you're thinking about creating, you think about its longevity and also what's going to happen to it when it closes. So you wouldn't start an activity unless you kind of think about the whole system as a whole. So you will always try and create from a place where that loop of, you'll consider the resources coming into the loop, you'll track the use of the resources, you'll see how much they're going to be upcycled, recycled, or reused, and then you'll want to close the loop as much as possible. So often we think about kind of circularity to do with waste management. So that's like a simple example of circularity. So what are you going to bring into the system? So let's use an event as an example because it's easy. So what resources are going to come into your event? What are you going to use on site? How is it going to be used? What's going to happen with it at the end of the event? And what's going to happen with those resources? Will they go back into the system or will they end up in landfill or something like that? So this is a basic example of like how to consider the circular loop. So we speak about this on a business level in terms of like when you're creating a business, how to create it in a circular way. So to think about the circular design when you're actually instigating the business that you want to create. What resources are you going to use? Are they going to be something that you can reuse and stays in the system? Or is it going to be something that you're consistently purchasing and purchasing and purchasing, and then is going to go straight out of a single use experience? And this can be energy from workforce, it can be marketing materials, it can be like physical resources, it can be economics, funding, for example. Are you going to get like a batch of funding and then it's going to run out and then you're not in a circular system again? So for me, it's about instigating the mentality of circularity into our design. So whether it's systemic, whether it's operational, whether it's ourselves. So is the energy that I'm putting in linear? Or am I teaching a bunch of people? Am I educating a bunch of people that are then going to continue the loop? Are we feeding each other constantly with this engagement that we're doing? Circular thinking can be applied at many, many different levels. I've done a few workshops around different examples based on different sectors. So, for example, I did one to do with set production and film industry. So I gave some case studies of people that I know in the US that create set design by creating panels. So the panels are created in a uniform way, in a way where they can intersect in different ways, different angles, different sizes. They're bolt together, they're easy to transport. And what they did is they created partnership with multiple production agencies. So then this set is set up, it's decorated and created in a way where it can be a complete film set. It's packed down and it's hired by somebody else. The transportation goes straight to the next production agency and they use it again. So in this way, you're working with each other in terms of collaboration, and you're also creating something as a collective. So your resource costs are less, the transportation costs are less, and the material use is less. So it's kind of a collective field of thinking that is from the start to the finish. And even the set design, even once it's complete, it's all made from wood. So it's biodegradable. So it's a very sustainably sourced wood, and it just easily breaks down. So whenever it ends up being finished or it degrades over time, it will go back into that system. So it's about design, it's about thinking ahead, and it's about communicating with other people that may have the same needs or challenges as you and finding solutions together, a bit like what Tammy's speaking about here, right? So how do we create solutions together that will remain in the system?
So you've obviously done consulting for a lot of different sectors, right? Have there been some sectors that are more resistant than others in terms of sustainability? I don't know. This is just me being curious.
So I think it's not to do so much with the sector itself. It's more to do with the longevity of establishment of the organization. So one thing, because I used to work for sustainable brands. So in San Diego and London, we used to run these conferences. They're still run today, but I don't work with sustainable brands so much anymore. And basically, we have the heads of all these huge corporations that come together and they meet with grassroots entities, and everyone shares the stories, a bit like what Tammy's wanted to do with the storytelling, right? So people will come and they will present what they've been doing as an organization, and people will learn from each other. So it's like a Q&A, it's knowledge sharing. We run a lot of focus groups and workshops where big people can learn from small people and vice versa. So it's like a cross-reference. It's a really beautiful event. If you ever get to go to Sustainable Brands Conference, it's really a great time. And I was a bit of an activist, I'm not going to lie. When I was younger, I was like chaining myself to trees in Australia and stuff in my 20s. So I came with this kind of activist stance when I started working with sustainable brands. And I remember once I was sitting on the table with Nestle, with the sustainability manager of Nestle. And at the time, I was quite discriminatory towards Nestle in terms of their water sourcing and what was happening with them. I was also there with Coca-Cola. So they were sponsoring one of the events, and anyway, there was a whole story about Coca-Cola. So I ended up really wanting to understand these heads, right? In terms of like, where are they at as an organization when what I see and what we see as a public is something that's very damaging, right? So how do I explore that with them? So they started sharing their story. And what I realized is that it's not actually resistance. Like when I was speaking to them, or I was speaking to the CEO who was also there, or the directors, it's because they have a huge structure. And I also spoke to a very large organization here, which I won't mention names to, who often what happens with my clients is they reach out because they want to be more sustainable. But what happens is they're here, and what they have in mind of sustainability is like way over there in Balzan, you know, it's like not anywhere close at all. So for them, there's almost a disconnect in terms of how do we get there? How do we move this huge structure to a new direction? And one thing that is like a tagline that I now use in my trainings is about steering a ferry. So when you steer a ferry, you use a tugboat, and the tugboat slowly redirects this huge structure. So when you're trying to steer, you have to go slowly around the corner. You can't just turn on a 2-penny piece and be going in a different direction. And this was something that as an activist, I really took some time to really understand, right? But in terms of resistance, now what I learned is really about hearing what their obstacles are. So for me as a client, as a consultant, it was about learning to listen. It was about learning to understand my client. So they have a need and a desire to be sustainable. So even with the Event Industry Council, this committee that I chair, we have massive corporations on that committee, huge. So it's about understanding what the objectives are, understanding what the challenges are, understanding what their needs are, and offering them solutions. So trying to help them to find new pathways, either alternatives or different ways of doing things or systemic changes. And often what happens, and people often fear greenwashing at this level. So when they're large operations and they want to do something well, so this was another example I could give you about Coca-Cola. So they had sponsored the event, and they got all these activists in San Diego. They all came in on kayaks. We were having a gala dinner down on the it's like the seaside kind of in San Diego at this conference center we'd be using. And they blocked the whole event with kayaks, huge signs against Coca-Cola. And Coca-Cola were like a massive sponsor of the event. And in the sessions that I'd been with them, I probably would have been in the kayak like 10 years before. But here I was standing there with Coca-Cola having a drink, talking to them about how the changes they're trying to do in terms of their water sourcing, in terms of their systems, in terms of the plastic reduction, that they're trying to use different labels, they're trying to use different bottles to make sure everything is more recyclable. But it's a change that takes time. And it's a change that as a consultant, for me, working at a large level and a medium level and a small level, it's actually all the same. Yeah. What are your obstacles? What are the problems that you're facing in terms of being sustainable in your impact areas? So like Tammy said, everyone has different impact areas. That's why reporting is helpful. Carbon footprinting is helpful that we offer. So you can see where your impact areas are, and then you reduce. So how do you bring in more positive and reduce your negative impacts? And it's really about what are the obstacles, what are the solutions, and how do we slowly implement them and create enough engagement and ownership and make sure that the economic structure follows that path. And then the resistance sides, because often the resistance is fear. It's fear of not knowing how to do it.
Exactly. And that's where the education comes in, right? That we were speaking about before, the awareness, the education, and also Tammy made a really interesting observation earlier when you mentioned how as a little island, perhaps you want to elaborate on this. Perhaps we're not open to collaborate as much because we fear we're more prone to compete.
So there's two ways, I think, as well, just to feed into what Gail was saying. And again, whether you're a business, whether it's for as a consumer, as just a person living on this planet, it's an imperfect journey. And the minute that we embrace the fact that it is going to be an imperfect journey, then the steps that you need to take towards whatever it is you're trying to achieve becomes easier. Because this idea, again, if you're like, that's where greenwashing comes in, like what the advice I give when it comes to businesses is, so long as you're transparent and honest, and if you fucked up, it's okay, you say it. And it's not you use that as an excuse to get out of the things that you messed up in, but you know, it is, we're on this journey together. And the ones who are actually moving towards that journey are definitely better off than the ones who are doing nothing about it. Again, whether you're an activist, whether you're an individual, whatever placing this is, you know, so I think that concept of imperfect journey is one of the kind of key concepts that I really try to share. But to answer the question on remind me, sorry.
No, I just remember the observation that you made, because the resistance that we have here in Malta.
There are these kind of key concepts that I really try to work on. Imperfect journey is one of them. Collaboration is another. But I put it in the context of our culture, and someone who was raised in this culture too, was that competition over collaboration is the way that you are going to succeed. In 2024, I would say that that no longer exists. And the minute that you embrace that, especially on a small island community like Malta, you will definitely get ahead of those who are keeping everything to themselves and look at everyone as competition. Because even as JP mentioned, you know, he works with so many other people who are like-minded. Even if they are also retailers, they might sell similar products to him, but why do this alone? You know, the minute that you do that alone, you isolate, you become more overwhelmed, and there's more likely that you will not actually move towards the goals that you would like to move towards to. So if you flip that, you know, flip what we have been told, you know, at school they told you to keep your notes to yourself, to not let anyone copy what you're doing. Like, I mean, my grandfather was an artist, and he always debunked the idea of copying. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and we're all inspired and somehow copy what we see around us. But even just the language copy is just so, like, it's so useless, you know, it gets you nowhere. So instead of using the word copy, I was inspired by. Now, obviously, if someone is stealing your ideas, then that's not really embracing the concept of collaboration, right? That's someone who's trying to get ahead of you. So I've been there before, and it's not a nice feeling. But that also just teaches you who you need to approach and who you shouldn't. And the minute that you find the people who have that same kind of mindset, magic can be created, and that's how community starts to build, you know. Like I mean, Jay, I remember coming to your shop in 2019 and like being like, oh my God, this is great. Zero waste shopping in Malta. This is brilliant. All my family. And I remember coming and being like, wow, this is amazing. And looking to where you've kind of come today and the community that you've built today, the amount of people that you've handheld or not, but you've, you know, brought them on the journey with you. It's beautiful to watch. And again, I'm sure you can speak more for yourself on this part, Jay, but like, you know, you've built a community over these 4 years, and I'm sure you've surprised yourself at how many people have come onto the journey with you.
For sure. I think that, meaning, going off on that, I think one of the issues, and meaning I speak about this constantly with other business owners in Malta. In fact, at one point again, you know, we try to collaborate. And apologies again, I'm being consumed by darkness in this car. So if you're seeing me, great. If you're not, you just hear my voice. But one thing that we always struggle with, and I think this is the sense to end up by happening, exactly like what Tammy is saying, and what Gaye touched upon before a little bit as well. Being in a very small island, I think it's great, of course. I mean, the collaborative power is extremely, extremely, extremely important. If you want to end up by being a brand that especially is kind of like setting itself above everybody else in terms of bringing about something new, and especially around the area of sustainability, which tends to be sometimes, like we mentioned before, a bit of a buzzword, and people are kind of like using this as a kind of like a platform to kind of bounce themselves off onto other brands as well. You're always constantly working to try and peak above the other, let's say, crap, let's say, that there is, let's say, on social media and marketing, essentially, right? Meaning one of the biggest things that we basically always constantly need, and this is something which I've had to end up by learning the hard way in Malta, is that we've now moved in a kind of a culture and a tradition of more consumerism, capitalism, this kind of sense of constantly wanting, constantly seeing, constantly desiring something new, something flashy, something great. We've really embraced it like there's like no tomorrow. Meaning, unfortunately, I think we've really forgotten a lot of our own typical traditions and cultures, and we've embraced this Americanization of what life basically is about in terms of the big malls, the underground malls, going to a car park, getting basically just jumping in and going into bonds and going onto an app and quickly buying something and having everything at your fingertips, right? And we're always fighting up against that. And being as small businesses, we have to end up by working together to try and fight against that culture, essentially. And it's not easy. And I think when especially your small teams and you're running a business and you have multiple hats of the accountant, the marketer, the person who's setting up the front office, dealing with HR, dealing with all these other things, you tend to end up by losing sight of what you've set up in the first place, and you tend to end up by, and this is I can speak personally for myself, you tend to end up by forgetting to end up by really embracing and really kind of celebrating the small wins, and you look at only the losses. And that's something I think, let's say, maybe we can set up for a different forum about the mental health issues about setting up businesses in Malta in general. But essentially, it's something which unfortunately we tend to end up by losing sight of. But yes, for sure, that's something which I really honed on to. I think as my biggest win and my biggest kind of like shining light when it comes to Reroute on the bad days as well as on the good days is the community that we've been able to really build in such a small span of time with very, very little funding, essentially, because we built it up on our own. And it was a kind of very much a kind of a solo trip, essentially, going down the path of entrepreneurship. And it really was able to kind of, like you said, basically, and we're able to really kind of like sometimes really hold people by the hand. And as we've all said, you know what I mean, on this journey of sustainability, it can be super, super overwhelming. Meaning I have a store where we sell a little bit of everything in terms of a lifestyle approach where you can try and reduce your overall impact when it comes to single-use plastic, when it comes to toxins, when it comes to chemicals, etc. And not even I am able to end up by using all the products on a very regular daily basis. But what I tell to people is it's a journey, right? You start small and you build your way up. And yeah, meaning in terms of the community that we've really tried to grow is that's really the message that we try to end up by really getting across. You start from somewhere and you work your way up, you know what I mean? And we would rather have 1 million people, and this is I think a quote I forgot by who, she's a zero waste chef. You'd rather have 1 million people doing zero waste incorrectly than 1 million people trying to end up by doing it correctly, right? Meaning it's a journey that starts from something small, and small actions basically build up, like what Tammy said, to larger ripple effects.
For sure. And I see I mean, I follow you on social media as well, and I see how creatively you educate the public about different products that you store in your shop. And it must be quite satisfying, JP, like if someone, for example, who has no idea about a product starts using it and then comes back to your shop and asks for it again, and I don't know, gives you a little story about how it changed there. Do you have any examples of those to share with us?
For sure. I think one of our biggest things, or let's say one of our biggest what we're very, very passionate about at the moment, and it's always changing, right? We started off with the very basics, like your typical bamboo toothbrush and your cotton buds. We were jumping on that whole kind of craze at one point or another. But where we've really landed upon at the moment is really lifestyle, skincare, makeup, these kind of brands, because purely because just a purely a passion around skincare and around lifestyle kind of products, like reusable bottles, reusable cups, things like this. And what we really kind of like tried to end up by changing a little bit is the accessibility factor, in terms of how accessible we allow the products to basically be. We no longer rely on just us being a single shop or a single online shop, but we also have a distribution wing where we distribute the products amongst different boutiques and so on and so on and so forth. And we had one client come in, I think it was a few weeks ago. I think it was actually, I think, an event, and we stock some of our products at a particular spa. These spas and Blossom spas, a few spas basically around Malta, who wanted to try and, let's say, tap into that whole younger, let's say, niche market, who are looking for a vegan, for example, facials and things like that. But we don't obviously just focus on vegan, let's say vegan products. It's more about using natural ingredients, right? Naturally sourced ingredients. And one of our brands that we really tend to advocate is a brand that actually utilizes raw food materials, food waste materials, and resources them and reproduces them and uses them to manufacture skincare products. So, for example, they utilize apricot stones coming from the juicing industry, which they crush down, they reutilize, they extract the essential oils from the apricot stones, which technically would have gone to food waste, and they make facial cleanser out of this, and so on and so forth. They do the same thing with argan shells, the same thing with bergamot juice coming from the juicing industry, and this particular brand, this particular customer had a patient there and then decided to buy certain products. And she came up to me and she actually found me in the road. It was very funny. I was at lot 61 and I was having a coffee, and I had posted a very funny, let's say, reel about, I don't know, something specific. And she told me, "You're the guy who does that particular reel, blah, blah, blah." She told me, "Oh my God, I just began using the skincare product because I went for a vegan facial that was gifted to me by a friend of mine as for my birthday. And I've been now using these products for the past 6 weeks, and I've seen a major change, even like in terms from," she told me she has some hormone problems as well that she suffered with before in the past, and she's realized that it's actually really reduced certain kind of outbreaks that she used to have before in her skin, and as well as, let's say, her impact, let's say, from a overall packaging perspective, she realized. So we get a lot of like people kind of coming up to us with like these like little positive, cute stories about how it's impacted them and their overall, let's say, consumer journey as well, when it comes to buying and choosing products which are more sustainable, because that's actually then, let's say, drove her to begin thinking differently when it comes to actual other products. And then she researched as well about female products, let's say menstrual cycle products, which she realized that since she had a major problem, let's say, with her hormones, let's say, from just the skincare, she began realizing through her research that maybe her menstrual cycle products were not great because they contain also chemicals, and she began utilizing something which is more natural. So it's kind of against, like what Tammy and what Gail are saying, it's a journey, right? And through small minor steps, you begin thinking differently, and you begin surrounding yourself with different things you're reading, different things you're researching, different people you're actually speaking to. And it ends up by spiraling in a positive way to a different kind of consumerism or different kind of consumer journey when it comes to sustainability. And that's, I think, what we try to really advocate for at Reroute.
I love that. It's the ripple effect again.
Yeah, honestly, yeah.
And we must not forget, though, to speak a little bit about financial sustainability. Gail, we mentioned this morning as well. And as JP mentioned, sometimes even when you're running your own business, whatever, you try and do the right thing and you try and keep everything in check. But how, of course, it's a business at the end of the day, and financial stability is important. you know. So how do you advise your clients? I don't know, what is the biggest thing around this?
So
how has it influenced your approach, you know, to creating long-term sustainable practices?
Gotcha. So in terms of kind of financial sustainability, the biggest thing that we see, in fact, often the reason for outreach is because there's a market shift, and then something's happening either in their stakeholder group, so whether that's funding, whether that's stakeholders in terms of partners, whether it's consumers or clients or suppliers or buyers. Generally, that's the instigation often for outreach in terms of sustainability for small to medium and large businesses. So if you're in a startup, normally it's because you're values based. So you want to create something to do with sustainability from scratch. For those that are more established and they're starting to notice something's happening in the market, often their outreach request to the consultancy is, something's changing in the market. Our stakeholders need something that's more sustainable. We want to provide something that's more sustainable. We've got lost along the way. Can you help? And so then we look at kind of what's happening, where things are shifting, how that's impacting the economic structure and their environmental and social impacts. And for me, in terms of financial sustainability on every level, it's about being agile. So one of the things I think we all learned through COVID, JP gave a great example earlier, of how you have like an idea of what the business is going to be and you create it. And in kind of entrepreneur realms, we call it entrepreneur narcissism. So it's when we think we've got this really wicked idea and we're like, okay, I'm going to do this thing, like everybody's going to love it. And then we create it and then it's like crickets. Doesn't go anywhere. The market changes, there's new needs, something shifts, and we've put all of this energy into creating something that is just not financially working out. And especially in this creative sector. So, you know, given that we're in a workshop around creativity and creatives doing entrepreneurship, so this can be really very influential for this sector. So often, like the creative sector struggles a lot in terms of financial security or sustainability for long term. So what I've learned along the way is that to be financially sustainable, the key piece is to be agile. Mm-hmm. So it's to really like keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the market, to keep assessing what's happening, to also assess your own motivation levels, your own inspire levels, whether your idea of what you want to create or bring into the world is changing or not, and to give space for that. But to really be able to shift and to engage everybody within your organization to make that shift. So financial sustainability for me is about mirroring the needs again. So it's about reading the needs of the stakeholders, the consumers, the buyers, even the supply chain will mirror the market. So if you're an organization or a business and you're noticing that your financial sustainability is subsiding in some area. Maybe it can be because the resources you were using before are now becoming limited. It might be because your stakeholders no longer want to give funding to something that's not sustainable. I've had some organizations who are, I'm not going to mention names, but like work in the financial sector, for example, and want their portfolio to not be where it was. Where they loan money to or where they support in terms of their partnerships, but they want to shift it to a more sustainable portfolio. So from their heart, they want to move, but it has to be a gradual process because they have a lot of money from investors and they also invest a lot of money. So how to shift that? So it's about, okay, we want to change the direction of where we're going to remain financially sustainable. So this is about, before you used to talk a lot about long-term business planning. So anybody who's done any kind of like degrees in business development normally has gone through this whole process of projections and building a business plan and all of this stuff. So this has really changed. So now we don't encourage strategy build more than a couple of years, because the market is changing so dramatically, so fast, especially with all the new digital technologies that are coming in, and just globally with climate change and everything else that's shifting, and the economic structures, everything is changing so fast that it's really about, what do you want to do now? What's happening in the market? How do you shift your focus in a way where you're not damaging what you're doing already, but you're starting to bring in new product lines? Often we encourage a shift from product to service. So you're also kind of expanding your catalog in terms of shifting away from just being consumer based experience, but to bring in new services. So you have different avenues. So if long-term resources change, you can also have something that's more long-term. So financial stability, when it comes to sustainability, is really key. And it will depend on what your product line is, what your service line is, what sector you're working in, what's happening in your market. At the moment, for example, just to use the tourism sector. So we were having a lot of meetings. So at the moment, I'm actually supposed to be in Las Vegas, having focus groups with a whole bunch of fancy people, talking about the trajectory of the tourism sector. And we had a meeting about it as a committee last week, because the representatives are all going there this week. And I decided not to, for various reasons, not least of all because I'm not particularly a big fan of Las Vegas. Last time I went, I had a nervous breakdown. I was like, what is going on in this place? It's ironic we go there to talk about sustainability, the most unsustainable place in the world. So anyway, we're speaking a lot about aviation. So obviously for the tourism sector, aviation is huge. Impacts are huge in the aviation sector. So it's about how to be more agile in that sector, and how to bring in sustainable fuels, which are completely available already. But the issue of changing the economic structure to being a benefit to running with sustainable fuels is not there yet. So sadly, people are still purchasing normal petrol, normal aviation fuel, not biofuel. So we're kind of advocating for that change to be made before the need is there, because often it's created by need. So financial sustainability for me is about being agile and forward thinking. So even for myself in my own business, I have constantly got to keep changing product lines to stay ahead of the wave, and also to really be with what I want to do. Like this year I had to assess, do I want to become an auditor? Everybody I know now is a sustainability consultant without any experience of implementing sustainability at all. So now everybody is a sustainability consultant, and they're helping organizations with ESRS and it's a European sustainability reporting standards that is now mandatory for organizations. So do I want to be an auditor? No, I don't. Actually, it doesn't interest me at all. Do I want to stay with training and engagement? Yes, I do. Okay, so what can I offer to people that people are going to need for me to remain in the game? Because at the moment, the game is about certification and reporting. So I don't want to give up what my why is, what my passion is. So how do I focus on shifting my business plan? Shifting my product line. And I had some meetings with my management team, and we came up with a bunch of things that they wanted to offer and I wanted to offer. And we rebuilt the website. We've just been doing mail outs to like 3,000 people talking about. So yeah, for me, financial stability is about agility and about noticing the market changes and being ahead of that wave. It's a bit long. I think
That was great. Thank you. I'm wondering if we can open the floor to questions. If anyone, we've been talking a lot, but we haven't heard your voices. So I don't know if I'm seeing two people on camera, Jacob and David. I don't know if you have any questions for the panel.
I think
Jacob
does.
You're on mute. Yep.
Please. How long have you guys been in this sustainability sector?
I can go. Hi, Jacob. All right. Um, well, I think it's been about 12 years. I don't know the counting, but I basically moved into sustainability. I started in fashion design and I did my BA in fashion design. And in second year, I understood that me and fashion design are really not as aligned as I thought we would have been. Very real Devil Wears Prada moment in London. And that's when sustainability in fashion came along in my life. And I found a lot of purpose in that because fashion is known to be one of the most impactful industries in the world. And so that's when my journey started. And that was back in 2011. So you can do the maths.
I think I'm the youngest out of all three in terms of my sustainability lifestyle or my sustainability journey because, well, and I say my previous background, I was unfortunately working with for one of the, let's say, industries which doesn't tend to end up by getting all the best rep. I was working for pharmaceuticals for around 10 years as a biochemical engineer, and I quickly then realized that this is not at all what I want to be doing, and it's not at all that follows my ethos or any of my values. So it was going very much against the grain for at least 4 years. And then I decided to basically move back to Malta, and it's now, I think I've been with Reroute for nearly 5 years now, so I'm going on 5 years.
It's interesting, there's a commonality in our stories, Jay, where
Yeah, you are going into corporate. Idea thinking you're going to do some kind of major impact, but yeah.
You want to, like, you know, what you don't want.
No, you realize. I think, I think it's, like you said, I think it's sometimes there are some specific core values and ethos, which is very much to your center, right? And really resonates with you as a human being or with your own energy. And I think you quickly realize that it's going against your grain and you need to change before you go crazy.
Feeds into that concept of imperfect journey.
Mm-hmm.
It's like what Gail mentioned before, being driven by your why and your purpose and what you believe in.
I'm going to unfortunately have to step out, actually, Sarah, just to mention, because like I mentioned before, I'm going to have to leave you. So thank you very, very much, everyone. And I wish you a rest of a great panel discussion between Gail and Tammy and Sarah.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
Have a good
Ciao.
class.
See you. Thanks.
Yeah, so my journey, just to follow on with the others. So I guess I've always been a wild child ever since I was a kid. So I grew up in nature. My mom was like a hippie. I think both my parents pretty much were. So I grew up in the UK, just climbing trees and learning about the flora and the fauna. And I went through school, like writing, you know, big pictures of the globe with love hearts in the middle and all these things. You know, I was really like an earth kid. Then I studied earth science. I did environmental science and maths and physics at college, and then I went into earth science. And I had all these, like, I remember having these kind of job offers, huge job offers from like people like Shell and stuff. And I was like, why would I want to work for you guys? It's like so gross. And I think I kind of just fell into the events and tourism sector when I started to travel. And loved it. I loved like bringing people together and, you know, the buzz that you get from like thousands of people having like an amazing time. And I was doing a lot of voluntary work outside of what I was doing with the events sector, all to do with kind of sustainability and my values. And then I went to New Zealand because I really wanted to learn about sustainability, like myself, to like live on the land and grow food and, you know, learn to chop wood and learn to really live by the roots of myself. So I started doing 6 months in New Zealand and then 6 months back in the kind of event and tourism sector. And a bit like Tammy and JP, there got to be a point after a couple of years where I would dread coming back into that space and seeing the damage I was creating by the things that I was investing my energy into. And also because I was an organizer, I also started to understand that I have a list of 500 things that I need to deal with. And sustainability, as a person who's mega passionate about it, would always, I would be like, is someone doing the recycling? You know, would be like something that would be like a minimum, as I was like loading a truck with a bunch of stuff. And I was like, oh my God, I am super passionate and I'm barely scratching the surface here. So all of the other people that have no idea where to start or no even idea of how to do this are going to be struggling way more than me. So I just shifted sector. I decided I'm not going to work for other people anymore. I'm going to work for myself, and I'm going to start small, and I'm just going to help support the people that want to make a change in the world and do things that they're doing, but do them differently, and to help support them to implement sustainability within what they're doing. So I trained in ISO, I trained in GRI, very quickly realized that in Malta 15 years ago, we were not ready for GRI and ISO, even Green Key, everything. We were speaking about all these different certifications. And there was like, if we implement any of these here, none of it's going to work. And we started working like collectively to start bringing people together and showcase people. We ran something called Action Planet, me and a woman called Fiona Hornstein. I think, Tammy, I think you were involved in that, no? Like back in the day.
I remember Fiona, actually. Wow.
Yeah. And so we started we put together like 40 NGOs and all the creatives we could find, and started speaking to all the academic systems to be like, okay, we want to come together and start working together to do towards sustainability. And I think that shift stayed with me. Then I didn't want to work for anybody anymore that wasn't aligned with the values that I was holding. And, you know, this thing that you have when you first start is you do everything pro bono, right? Because you just care. And then after a few years, I was like, okay, if I'm going to live on this, you know, and not live like a poor person, I need to learn about how to price myself. I need to learn how to walk amongst people that have money and use their money for purposes, and how to do that and how to speak at that level. So what started as a passion, and you know, I would walk into rooms and I would email random people just so people know here, like, never feel, especially in Malta. Malta is incredibly accessible for everybody to have a voice. What I do when I want to change something in this country is I find the email address of the ministry. I don't know whether I should say this out loud, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So I would find the minister that was responsible, and I would write them an email, because you can find it, it's all online, all on Google. I send them an email and I would offer them solutions to targets that they are taking care of. And miraculously, I don't really know how, but I was getting invites from ministers to go to their offices and speak to them about these solutions that I was coming up with. And it started a ball rolling of like, now I do a lot of stakeholder focus groups. Now I'm kind of renowned for it here in the islands in terms of like working at national level and bringing councils together, or, you know, working with large entities and running focus groups. Now we're working on urban mobility and multimodal transport, and all sorts of other different sectors that we're working in, climate change and a bunch of other things. We're working in different pods with stakeholders. But really, like, if you're passionate about something, just email them, not to criticize. That's not the approach I realized works, what gets you to the table, but is to really find out what you want to offer and put it forward as a solution, because there is so much need, especially here in Malta, in terms, you know, we often feel like we can't affect change at that level. And it was my goal, like, I want to change policy here. How do I do that? How do I get my voice heard? And it just turned out I just needed to email people. I just needed to be like, hey, can we have a meeting? I want to hear what your problems are. And I want to talk to you about what I've seen out there in the world, or what I know that you could do. I remember when Herrera was in power, I don't know whether it was probably political issues with me mentoring names, but I would send him WhatsApps of all these case studies that I would find abroad. And then he would be like, oh, this is really cool. You know, it would start the dialogue within the ministries. And this is then passed on ministry after ministry after ministry, because when you start the ball rolling with one political party, there is some collaboration that happens in terms of when there's a switch. So to really never feel like you can't make that change, especially here in Malta, it's so accessible. And this is something I just want to say to all of you, because we have powerful, powerful voices. There's a whole quote that I normally include about, you know, one voice can change a room, and one voice can change, you know, a region, and one voice can change the world. And it's really true. Like, if you're passionate about something and you're speaking really from the heart and you want to help and you want to make change, just go for it, like whatever it is, and come up with a plan and make it happen. And that's it. That's all I wanted to share.
I think the biggest misconception, like we were talking about before, is that we have to do something big or something grand, right? So it doesn't have to be big. It can be a small action, small step, bringing it into our own industries, into our own personal lives. Yeah, I don't know if we want to hear from anyone else in the audience. Any more questions for our panel? I can only see 2 people on camera. Everyone else is off camera, so.
I think it's always nice hearing, you know, valuable input from people who have experience in a particular field. I think the challenge is understanding how people like myself can relate that to something very specific, like, you know, creative service provision, like in my case, a filmmaker. But I think there are always very good takeaways, you know, universal takeaways, like, you know, the why. Why do you do this? You know, what makes you get up in the morning and say, you know, because I think now we live a life where we can design our life. At least some people have the blessing to design their life. You know, how do I want to live my life? You know, and I think understanding the why is so crucial to design your life. You know, some people call it designing a rich life, but you need to design your life, and how sustainable is that, given that, you know, as the panelists mentioned, especially in our field, you know, the continual change. So I think another keyword is pivoting. You know, I think Dale used the word agile. It's really about pivoting. You know, it's no longer, you know, it was mentioned, I'm just repeating here, but I'm reflecting as well. It's not really about a 10-year business plan anymore. It's, you know, AI, take AI, for example. I mean, the impact it's going to have on my industry and many other industries is incredible. And we don't even, so it's there, AI is there. We all know about AI and what it can do, but do we really? Because it's progressing so fast that any business plan I have now today is already outdated. So yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's always nice hearing reflections about people's experiences, and I think we, you know, as entrepreneurs, we should all, you know, just gather all this information. I think the last word is community, you know, and community is something which I've been trying to crack for quite a while, and community is really the way forward. Yeah, especially for Maltese, you know, we're like you know, I need to keep my secrets to myself because a client's either going to go to me or to my competition. But community is so important. I think anybody who manages to make that leap, that step into saying, you know what, I know how to do this and I'm going to share it with other people, I think that's really the future. You know, community is the future, because somebody in the community, like let's assume this is a micro community, right? I mean, somebody can say something which would affect my trajectory for business entirely, and I think community is really, really underrated.
So to feed into that, David, thank you so much for sharing that. So there is like this double-edged sword with Malta, where yes, we've all experienced this like competitive kind of thing, right? And the secrecy. But up until not long ago, like even when I reflected to the fashion industry, up until not long ago, Malta was driven by community. Malta was driven by sustainability in our culture, when the scarpan, the shoemaker, you know, repairing things all the time and having the community to know who to go to for certain things, you know, like actually our true nature of our culture is very community driven. Something happened along the lines that what JP said, actually, we decided to go on like the more is more trajectory rather than less is more trajectory. So I think it will have to take a bit more of like a bold stance, because you're going against the grain. But the minute you go against the grain, you realize there's so many others who are willing to go against the grain with you, actually. And it's kind of it's more intuitive to our culture and our nature than we think. And also just to feed into the why. I don't know if any of you know of Simon Sinek, but he's the kind of guy who has birthed it, right? And he has so much resources and so much kind of wisdom in this idea of leading from the why. And the minute that you get onto that kind of train, you're willing to be more agile, because like Gail also said, you're reflecting back into, okay, but why am I doing this? And then that question allows you to be more agile while staying true to your why and not changing it because the trend, and that's where everybody else is going, because trends never really last anyway, and so they don't actually end up being sustainable for the long run.
So maybe the secret is stripping back, right? And going back to our grassroots,
more
sitting around tables again and telling stories again and listening to one another.
This is exactly what we're trying to activate with Kurzita Collective, and in the events that we've had, which haven't been many because it's all volunteering, and two of us, not me, but 2 out of 4 of us are mummies and new mummies. So you can imagine our resources are slim, but we've had 3 events where we've had about 40 people show up. Majority of them, we have no idea who they are, which is quite rare in Malta, which is also really beautiful, all like-minded, all willing, all kind of sharing these sentiments of like, we want to create change, but we have no idea how. But at least we're showing up here to try and do something about it. And we all leave so buzzed from this feeling of like, oh my God, we're not alone. We're not alone, and like I said, the stories we've gotten from how people and then have engaged within their own space, a lot of local council stuff, a lot of community stuff within their own neighborhood. There's also, as an example, there's the Birkirkara Active Citizen Group. If any of you live in Birkirkara, get to know them. They do such amazing things. They're walking around Birkirkara on like history tours. They're going to the Birkirkara old people's homes to, do stuff with the old people's homes, and even these little changes, again, going back to this idea that it doesn't need to be massive, they're giving so much purpose to people, and they're helping people to strip back and go against the grain and somehow, and giving a lot of purpose and meaning to their lives, which is really amazing.
I'm gonna look that group up.
Yeah, you live in Birkirkara. Okay, great.
Giselle, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to basically share about my agreement about the whole community aspect, and I've noticed that I fully agree that we've moved away from it. And I think it's because, we've moved away from sort of your small village or town shops into sort of these one-stop shop shopping centers or malls or whatever you want to call them. And about 2 years ago, basically, I moved house, and I moved close to Melleha, which is my multi-standard spar. And I realized actually that I didn't need to go to the big shops anymore. All I needed to do was a Google search for the shops I needed, plus Melleha, and there is everything just like 2 minutes away from me. If only we look for it, I mean, I literally needed an internet cable, and first thing that came to mind was one of the 2 big shops that everybody knows about. I said, why am I going to get myself stuck in traffic, do a 30-minute commute, where I can just, so it's 2 minutes away. The shop has exactly what I need. And I've actually realized that if we sort of take take into account our surroundings, our immediate surroundings, or our nearby villages or towns or whatnot, we will actually find what we need. And we won't need to sort of travel the distances so much anymore. Again, not to speak against, obviously, the shopping malls and all that, but it's so nice if we sort of just get back to a centralized system, I think. And I know everybody's speaking about decentralization and disruption and all that, but I think sometimes sort of going back to what worked is also a good thing.
For sure. And
That's my 2 cents.
I think to feed into that, it's important to recognize that the built environment influences this, right? And if we look at the way that our built environment has changed in Malta over the last even just 10 years, it is encouraging us as individuals living in the space to fall part of this consumerist lifestyle that doesn't encourage local economy. Look at all the local businesses that have had to close down over the years because of this kind of globalized obsession. So it's also this, the phrase that I like to use a lot, which is quite used a lot within the world, the sustainability world, is like think global, act local. Right. So we're thinking of the globalized world because there is so much beauty to that, but act local, because we also need to maintain that local economy that allows us to build this community and allows us to build these social bonds. This and then goes into the whole topic of mental health and loneliness, which is one of the biggest epidemics in the world at the moment. And the built environment being influenced by these powerful heads is pushing us towards this more individualistic lifestyle, which is not sustainable. We're feeding into the sustainability talk, So I see these like little moments, like you said, Giselle, of like choosing where to buy from the local space as an act of positive rebellion. Like I've been a rebel all my life, and I'm not encouraging people to be rebellious if that's not what you like. And sometimes rebelliousness doesn't do well, but I reframe it as this act of like positive rebellion, where I refuse to be told how to kind of engage with the world by these bigger forces at play, because they're not in our best interest. And so we need to, and it goes back again to this idea of like self-reflection. What are my values? What are my why? And how am I going to live in alignment to that why? And whether that's with my family relationships, my work relationships, everything we're talking about today. Of course, we're in the concept of entrepreneurship and creativity, but we have to see it like, that spans over everything within our life, and not just with our business. And, like it's they're tools to kind of spill over everywhere, I would say.
I love that. And I think that's a really sweet note to end on. I want to say, I want to thank you, Giselle, for allowing me to moderate this panel. I really, really enjoyed it. And I want to thank the three of you, well, two here and one gone, for sharing your time and input with us, and also to the members of the audience that engaged with us as well. Thank you very much. It's honestly been a pleasure, and I really enjoyed spending these 2 hours with you. I don't know if you have any final words for us, any final takeaways.
I think I've said enough. But
Like the way you ended it. I don't want to look back.
This idea, I think,
about you.
Try to not put so much pressure on entrepreneurial journey, because it is imperfect, it is forever changing, and there's so much that you're constantly learning because you're also changing. So just be open to that kind of cyclical movement.
Great. And one thing I wanted to speak to is just something that David brought up. For me is very relevant. So we often hear all these stories and these experiences that other people have had going along this journey, which is great, super mega inspiring, right? So we're like, other people have actually done it, it's possible. Okay, it keeps us motivated. But then to really offer like a tailored exploration of what's going on. So for example, for David, like I would love to, something I had spoke to Giselle about, which she will go into in a second, is to offer some coaching for people on the course here for free, just a 30-minute call, just help you unpack a little bit what maybe your obstacles are. So I'd love to hear about what you're struggling with as a filmmaker in terms of sustainability, whether, you know, which of the 3 pillars are arising for you, why you're interested in bringing it forwards and in what way, or you know, what's your audience, what are your obstacles, what are your challenges, what are your needs, and to help support those of you on the call and anyone who's in the course to really offer a bit of that tailored support, because as you said, you know, it's very specific to everybody. To everybody who's here will have different challenges or different needs or different obstacles or different fears or doubts or questions. Like most people, mostly when I do trainings, I always say it's mostly actually just about like vomiting out all of the doubts that they have about it, and then hearing all of the things that are like obstacles and helping to find solutions. Really, like a training is really mostly just about what I call like clearing the dirty water out to make space for opportunity. And how do we create that? So Giselle will touch on it a bit more, I think. But so thank you, David, for bringing that into the space.
Thank you so much, everybody. Sas, thank you for an excellently moderated session. I think everybody definitely took something home with them. I mean, for me, it was super interesting. And I'm sure that, you know, people will agree with me. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Gail, for your contributions. Again, you know, sort of it's as David said, actually, it's really interesting to hear just people's experiences, you know, because even if they don't necessarily relate exactly to what you're doing, there's always something that you can take, or it might spark an idea. And ultimately, this is what entrepreneurship is all about. We speak about the entrepreneurial mindset, you know, so entrepreneurship is not just about starting your own business. It's about making use of the resources available to you in whatever avenue of life, whether it's work, whether you're self-employed, whether you're an employee, even if you're a parent, you know, it really is a mindset. And it's something obviously that we seek to promote through sessions like this. As Gail mentioned, she is very kindly offering a session to the people who have registered. So look out for an email from myself in the coming days with more information about that. As I mentioned earlier, I am now, I've just pasted the link to the Entrepreneurship for Creatives Facebook group in the chat. So if you would like to join, please do so. I also have to mention that this session, or rather the course, is very generously being supported by APS Bank. They will also be conducting a session for us next week on financial literacy, and that will be in person, so I hope you'll join us for that. And essentially, this is the end of the session. However, I remind you that we have another session on Thursday in person, 6 to 8 p.m. at Valletta Design Cluster, where we will be speaking about ideation and problem solving with Professor Leonie Baldacchino. She's from the Edward de Bono Institute for Creative Thinking. We've had this session with her before, and it's always excellent. She is someone who will really get your creative juices flowing, I can assure you. And just quickly to go over the rest of the sessions. So next week, we've got internationalization through crowdfunding. That's going to be online. We've got financial literacy by APS Bank on Thursday. That's in person. Then we've got mastering the marketplace, sales and media strategies. That's also going to be a webinar. And we end with an in-person session so we can all get together and enjoy a cup of tea on Know Your IP with Dr. Janine Ritzor. So that's going to be a legal session. Again, IP is obviously a very important topic for entrepreneurs. So I do hope that he will join us for the rest of the sessions. Thank you very much once again. This session has been recorded, not from the beginning, because I always forget to press the record button, but the majority, I'd say like 95% of it has been recorded. So I will also be sending that to you via email. And I wish you a very good night. Thank you so much, everybody.
Guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take it easy.